All right, everyone. Fantastic. So we are ready to get started here. Welcome to our webinar. Everyone, my name is Scott Lofton, and I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success at Codility. Codility is the leading technical assessment platform for over 1,000 customers globally. And again, we've got an exciting webinar today discussing how to hire at scale when you're growing fast. I'm joined today, this is an all-star panel. Really excited to introduce our panel shortly. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting the event. So Recruitee and Hireatable are here, and we just want to thank you for being such great sponsors and partners of ours. I also do want to mention, after the webinar takes place, we have an Expo tab over on the right-hand side. So if there's additional questions or commentary or things that you'd like to ask after the webinar takes place, feel free to join the Expo afterwards. And then last but not least, we really want to keep this webinar engaging as much as possible. So of course, we've got some questions that we'll be running through with the attendees here, but we would love for audience participation throughout. So if there's any burning questions that kind of come to mind, feel free to ask. And without further ado, I just would like to turn it over to the panel. And so we're really excited to be with everyone today. We'd love for everyone to go through and introduce themselves to the group. So I'll go ahead and I'll start. Why don't we start with Jennifer?
Oh, hello. So I'm Jennifer Peters. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Recruitee. Recruitee is an application tracking system. We're based in the Netherlands and we serve more than 4,000 companies in 75 countries. So it's very exciting to see how everybody's hiring. Our mission is around collaborative hiring, making it simple, structural, and very, very collaborative. I'm very excited to talk about hiring at scale. This has basically been my reality with our growth over the last 12 months. So it comes from personal experience as much as industry expertise. So I'm very excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. And Riyadh, we'll go ahead and move over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. My name is Riyadh. I am one of the enterprise customer success managers here at HireTool. At HireTool, we are a AI-powered global talent platform where we allow recruiters to source, engage, and rediscover existing talent in their ATSs or CRMs. And, much like Jennifer, I'm excited to be here and, talk about hiring at scale.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll move over to Estrela.
Hi, my name is Estrela Bonds. I am account manager with Randstad Technologies. We're a global org, but I sit in San Francisco. And for the last 5 years, I've been supporting orgs to deliver technical talent and services, both on the contract to hire, and direct hire side. So super excited to be here. I think this is going to be a really good discussion.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Jocelyn.
Hey guys, thanks for joining. Jocelyn. I work with Haste Talent Solutions. I'm a senior recruitment partner. We provide services in terms of like RPOs and MSP, so from both perm and contingent labor. I currently run the operations for an MSP, and I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic, great. Love the enthusiasm, love the energy of this group. So we're going to go ahead and dive into some of the content. And the first question, I'm going to start with you, Estrela. Could you share maybe some of the insights on your recruitment process and strategy today, and kind of let us know a little bit about maybe what's worked well for you and what hasn't, and kind of the context of how you're thinking about hiring at scale now?
Yeah, so what we do is we support our clients when they're trying to hire, and especially lately, we've been seeing roles coming through like 10 at a time for one specific skill set. I think the key, especially now because of how hot the market is to move as quickly as possible. I think, back when we were on site and back when, the market maybe wasn't as hot, you could get away with like a 4 to 5 step interview process. But now you really have to pare that down. I've seen people fall off the market after a couple of days, after one interview. And I think on average, this has probably shrunk, but on average, technical talent is on the market for 10 days. I think pretty much everyone on this panel can attest that it's probably less than that. So understanding that, and also making sure that your interview panel, whoever's a part of that, understands that so they can give you quick feedback, is going to be very important. And also, yes, there's a little bit of risk associated with paring down your interview process, but the risk is always going to be there, whether it's 1 step or 5 steps. So that's something that I think that a lot of orgs have been doing, and they've been really successful with doing that.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to bring other folks into the conversation. Riyadh, would love to hear what you guys are doing and sharing some of your insights around your process and strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And during this pandemic period, our team alone has grown so much, and even our customer success team has grown largely at scale over the pandemic, over the year of 2020. And as Estrela is pointing out, there's a lot of turnaround in the market. Candidates are available for such a short period of time. It's crucial to line up the parties that are going to be involved with the hiring process, the parties involved in interviewing the candidates that we are bringing onto our team, and making sure we get that feedback quickly, so collectively we can make the right decision moving forward with the candidate. And it's just, even when we look at what our customers are doing, our customers are actively building pipelines, nurturing candidates along, and looking for quick results, quick turnarounds to bring new talent on board. So it's a challenge, but for everyone, right? We always take the right steps, think about it, and we just move forward 1 step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I already see our first question from our audience pop in. So before that, I'd love to give the other panelists an opportunity to answer as well. How about yourself, Jennifer? What does kind of your strategy look like there at Recruitee, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you guys are looking into?
So we are very much into the collaborative hiring, and that was also, like Estrela said, much more easier when you were on location. You could have a candidate come for half a day and do 3 stages of the hiring process in one morning, and you would be able to make a decision. So there is a transition there on how do you get the information that you need to make a decision, but not necessarily multiply the hiring steps. And very often collaborative hiring sounds like, yeah, you need 10 people to interview, and therefore it's going to be very long, which is absolutely not the case. It's about being smart, combining steps together, bringing maybe 2 interviewers into 1 interview, and just make sure that you don't stretch yourself thin in terms of just having someone in the interview process for the sake of having them in. Make sure that everybody brings value there. What we've been very much looking at, and this is also with our partnership with Codility, is to make sure that we can do some of the steps very seamlessly and automatically without losing the personal experience during the interview. And I think this has been one of the biggest challenges in companies. How do you stay human in interviews when you are behind your computer? We have people here sitting in the living rooms, in the bedrooms. It's also much more personal. You suddenly have a candidate in your house instead of in the office. And there is a bit of a mindset shift that needs to happen. But I agree with Estrela, the risk is always there. It's about minimizing the risk by being smart. And at the end of the day, you're never 100% sure, but if you can be 90% sure, it should be good enough. And we all have to take a chance here and there on a business venture, a candidate, a teammate, or anything. So we shouldn't be scared. Absolutely.
And then finally, Justin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic as well.
Yeah, interview process, it's always particularly challenging, especially when, especially for tech talents where they kind of want to be more careful about it. And I totally agree, like Australia, we need to, hiring managers need to take some form of risk, and it happens with hiring anyone. I think part of that conversation, if you do work with a talent partner, is actually be really upfront and actually agree and align something that is in process, so they can also manage the candidates on that front. I think that's something, in terms of candidate experience, we all talk about it to say we need to have a positive one. And I think, the first and foremost thing is actually making them aware and manage their expectations in terms of what the process end to end is going to look like, and agree with your hiring managers, how long do they have to actually feedback. And, quick feedback in this day and age is actually very, very crucial, and actually good constructive feedback as well, not just to the candidate, but also to the talent partner and the sourcing partners who are actually looking after the recruitment for you, so they know actually, okay, where do I need to refine now? Do I need to change direction? What's different now? Has the requirements actually changed? And actually think about these things as they're recruiting to meet the requirements needed for the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I tend to agree as I'm kind of listening to each and every one of you. I think there's a lot more pressure on the process now too, right? Especially since we're still kind of in this limbo with being fully remote. And a lot of, it's really is a candidate's market right now too. I think we were talking last week around, someone had mentioned to me, it's like, hey, I went to the hiring manager and I told them, what are the three, like, I need to know the three things that you're really, really looking for in terms of core skill sets, because I want to make sure that we can get this candidate activated as soon as possible so we can move them through. And then you went back to someone went back to the candidate and they were already like swooped up. So in particular, I think more so even on the technical recruitment side and working with hiring engineers as well. I think this is great. I want to actually extend this conversation into a question from the audience. And so a follow-up to each of you from the audience here is, what are some of the best ways to get hiring managers to reduce the time in their hiring process without compromising on quality? I think it's a wonderful follow-up to this topic. And I'd love to hear, we'll start with Riyadh this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share sort of our thoughts. And, when working with hiring managers, whether it's internally for us or with our clients, with our customers, right, it's about setting that right expectation about realistically how long is a candidate going to be on the market, but also coming back to your thought there on the core skill sets. Do they have the core skill sets to say, start tomorrow? And, from there, can we expand? Can they learn certain skill sets on the job within their ramp up period? Or do we need to teach them certain skill sets during the ramp up period? But it's really about understanding, very similar to what you're mentioning, that core skill set that could bring that candidate on today. Because I have to set the expectation, whether internally or for our customers, that hiring manager is going to have a long list of expectations from this candidate. And I need to find that core skill set that helps our team grow or helps my client grow their team.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. I'd like to bring Jennifer into this. How do you work with your hiring managers? And
so being a hiring manager and working with hiring managers, it's a dual thing. I think expectation setting is super important. Pain point number one, talking to recruiters, is usually the hiring manager. And you can't chase them at the coffee machine after their interview to get their feedback, or you can't have a second conversation during a lunch break and say, okay, we don't find the candidate, talk to me again about who you want and what kind of skill set you're looking for. Right now, and this is why the process needs to be very solid, because all those organic conversations in office, in the corridors, and the chasing cannot happen anymore like this. And you're just going to be another email or another Slack message. And you're not going to get the focus of the hiring manager like you can sometimes do when you just pluck them from the floor and say, you and I need to talk now. So this is why the process is super important. I would obviously recommend to use an ATS rather than an Excel sheet. Everybody's going to work with a sourcing manager or an agency. A lot of companies do it themselves. It's terrible to see the whirlwind of emails and manual work and so on. So when you want to reduce time and not compromise on quality, you need to, one, have a solid process, two, have a way, an operational or way to make it reality, and not having a Google Sheet somewhere, because you're going to lose time and you're going to spend 50% of your time on that Google Sheet rather than talking to candidates. And I would say to not compromise on quality, and this is something I changed in my hiring process. I hire for multilingual talent, and therefore we used to have the language tests towards the end after we had assessed the skill set and so on, and we're just validating the language. And we found that we were winning time and efficiency on our hiring process, moving that step to the front so that we would really spend the time with the candidates that we needed, and we could still evaluate skill set. But because this was a high rejection stage, we decided to move it on the front so that we win more time for the hiring managers, and they only interview people that are more likely to be hired rather than keeping that towards the end. So for us, it was very much changing the order of the hiring process and trying to combine stages together. So similar interviews, rather than having two coffee chats in the office, we would now combine the two interviewers into one call, just to make sure, like I think Estrela said, that we don't have 5 or 6 or 7 hiring stages. I only have 3, but I involve 9 people in those 3 hiring stages, and it's very light on the candidate as well.
No, that's really great. Yeah, and I like the kind of relationship building that you talked about. Is we're not in the office. We can't just go over and knock on someone's desk and say we got to chat.
I don't have your candidate
Yeah.
evaluation.
Right.
Give it to me. I need to call
Right.
it. 10 days on the market. Come on. Chop,
Right.
chop.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. No. Jocelyn, I'd love to hear what you folks are doing.
Yeah, so it really depends on what kind of role and what kind of who your hiring manager is and what your relationship is with them. But I agree with what everyone has said, moving processes and actually thinking about if you do need to test a candidate, is the test you've designed fit for purpose? Because a lot of times you can have a generic Excel, to test a data analyst, but actually is that Excel spreadsheet complicated or easy enough for them to actually understand how it works within your team? Because every team is going to be different. So part of the hiring manager needs to understand actually how does my team work? If I give them an example on the data sets that we do and get them to test, and see how they do, is that going to be sufficient enough? So I think the first thing is if you do need to test them is actually think about whether A, it's fit for purpose, and B, where it's going to sit within the process. If it's no go on the hard skills, we're not going to talk to that person, then so be it. Or actually, do you do them it's just going to take 10 minutes at the beginning and we can just continue the whole thing afterwards, and make it a slightly longer but one stage process for the candidates. Second thing, and Estrela mentioned this before, is who needs to be there is the biggest question. Who really needs to be on the panel of this interview? Are we involving people that really don't need to be there? Are we involving actually the decision maker that needs to be on the panel? Do they need to be there? At what stage do they need to be there? Because sometimes with the seniority, maybe it's actually just the only person that's come through, the test and the initial, hiring manager contact, they'll work with the most often. And then we go to the decision maker just to do a little double check, a formal, confirmation that, yep, they're good to go. Really think about that. And if you're involving so many people, this is one thing that I would suggest everyone to do, is at the initial conversation with your talent partner and hiring manager, is to get them to look at the diary and start blocking out time over the next week or so. So they are making time and prioritizing, especially when you're recruiting at scale. We can't afford to have, candidates where, they're interviewing all across the place. It's actually look, hiring manager, block out a time, and in our initial conversations, we'll tell the candidates that these are the times that you're going to interview if you are successful in the first round, and actually make it more structured and that way. So actually everyone knows what's happening, how many candidates are expected to go into this stage, what happens next, get them to really prioritize, especially if you're hiring such a big volume of candidates sometimes for tech roles, getting them to think about it and actually making it their priority in their diaries is going to massively help kind of move things along as well.
Calendar coordination. It's
more than you think.
It's like herding cats. Yeah, absolutely. I understand this both from I'm a hiring manager myself, and I speak to a lot of hiring managers, recruiters all the time too. So it seems simple, but it's also difficult too in practice. So that's great. I think that helps. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's super important that you say we need to decide who comes in when in the hiring process. And very often companies are only going to add decision makers and people who are going to decide, and they forget to add someone that is also going to relate with the candidates. A team fit or peer interview is sometimes invaluable. It's not going to be a decision maker, but it's going to help the candidates make a decision. And in a candidate-driven market, you also kind of have to sell it yourself. So I would always advise to have, of course, all your decision makers need to be involved in one way or another, but it's also good to include someone in there that is going to help the candidates make a decision and not just the company. Because at the end of the day, if they have 3 offers on the table with the same salary, the best team and the best company culture is going to win. And I always like to add one in there, even if it's just joining the hiring manager and having a chat, but showcasing your culture and the team that you might want to join might be the deciding factor at the end of the day. So decision makers are nice, but the candidate also makes decision, and we need to cater to their questions and their doubts.
That's the human element, right, of our recruiting process as the interviewer as well that we were referring to earlier.
Yeah, we always say that, as much as we're interviewing the candidates are also interviewing us to a certain extent. And in a market where everyone's got so many choices, some candidates have been to an interview and go like, I just didn't like them. We just didn't have that chemistry and decided not to go for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Really great points across the board. Estrela, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of chime in here with some of your thoughts.
Yeah, just echoing, I think, what everyone said. One thing that I think about a lot is that you can build a JD. A JD is just kind of dreamt up from someone's head. We're not building people. We have to go find people based off of that JD. And so the rule of thumb I typically go for is an 80% fit. What 80% of these requirements do they need to hit? And then how are you screening for those? I know Jocelyn mentioned that you have to make sure that you're actually screening for what you're asking for, and that the right people are there to screen for that thing. So trying to keep it as simple as possible, I think, is important. But other than that, I think everyone hit on some important points. I think we'll get into this later, but what Jennifer mentioned about the peer interview, one thing to be careful of is burning that person out or burning the same interviewers out, especially in a remote environment. When you go there on site, you can see all the diversity. Oh, look how cool, like everyone is. This is great. When you're doing a virtual panel, you're curating that panel. If you're highlighting the same people, they may start to experience burnout because they're not getting back to the job that they actually need to do versus just interviewing every day because you need, let's say, we need a woman on the panel, and you put the woman on the panel. She's starting to realize, okay, am I the token woman that's on this panel? And also I'm really tired. I need to get back to my job. So that's something that to be, I guess, cognizant of when you're putting a panel together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think especially when, some of these peers might not be experienced, hiring managers that actually do a lot of recruitment. So like a lot of hiring managers, we know they are familiar with the process, they're familiar with recruitment in itself, but sometimes these peers aren't. And, like Estrela said, actually rotating, especially if you got a big team, rotating them around might be actually a pretty good idea.
That's really strong points across the board. I'd love to, I'm seeing like a live stream of questions coming in. I think these are great. So we'll try to pepper these in. I want to try to make it relevant to some of the topics we're speaking about. I'd love to move into, I think this naturally is a great segue into moving kind of the hiring manager process, strategy, how we work with them, thinking through what we're looking for, having that really curated alignment, understanding expectations, and let's move that into the topic around candidate experience. In particular, with the remote work environment, having to talk to candidates and show a culture that is virtual over a Zoom screen, and some of that impact around the pandemic still, frankly. So I want to start with Jennifer on this topic and talk a little bit about what strategies at Recruity do you guys have in place, or what are you kind of seeing trend-wise in the marketplace around creating a really differentiated candidate experience? Oh, I think you're on mute,
Sorry.
Jennifer.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
About that. It had to happen during this conversation. Companies are very much focusing on their career sites and showcasing their company, really going into the company culture, which means a lot of companies had to actually think about the company culture to be able to showcase it on their career site. Social media to develop company culture and showcase it is more and more important, especially with millennial candidates who will be on TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. So you really have to start going out of your way to build a company culture, one that is attractive, and then showcasing it on various platforms. So that's kind of before you even get the application. You need to really open up and not expect people to just guess it from who you are as a recruiter or who you are as a hiring manager. In interviews, and I find myself doing this as well, I do a lot more chit chat than I would normally do in a present setting. So you go in, you sit in a meeting room, and you can say, okay, you open your laptop and you go in. This is not possible today anymore. You have to have that human element. I sometimes joke, say, hello, welcome to my kitchen, just to break the ice. Not every candidate is comfortable in front of a camera. And therefore, we really need to make sure that we ease into the interview and make it much more a conversation. It's very easy to go into some sort of interview firing questions and not leaving enough space for the candidates to actually ask anything. So I time myself. If I have a 1 hour chat, and then I'll make sure that we leave at least 20 minutes for the candidate to come with their own questions. And their questions are just as informative as the answers I will get to my questions. And so we really need to be conscious. In an office, you might run 10 minutes later, but the candidate nowadays is going to fit an interview between maybe 2 customer calls. So you have to be on time. You have to make sure you get everything you need, but also you need to ensure that the candidate gets everything they need out of it. That's where a peer interview can be nice for a second round. And I typically do this as a group. And we play a game with the candidates. So it's actually not an interview as such, and it doesn't feel like an interview. So we tend to play a game for peer interviews just to see the click, because we've already validated the skill sets and so on. And at the end of the day, you want to know that your colleague is nice and trust the hiring manager that they're going to hire the competent person. And you need to make sure this is someone I can go after work, have a beer or a matcha latte during lunchtime and just have a nice chat and trust for your daily work. So it's a completely different way of doing things, and therefore I like to play games with candidates for the last stage and the peer review. And aside from this, I would say most companies forget that the candidate has more on the table, and they're still sometimes in the mindset like, we have a job, we're going to give you a job, and forget that it's an agreement and that it comes from both sides. And that's something we still have to educate companies on.
It's all really great points, and I think we're still learning. We've been in this kind of virtual environment for about 18 months now, and I still, we're definitely light years ahead, I think, from 18 months ago, where everyone was kind of in panic mode and how does this translate? But there's still things that we're optimizing, and I love the kind of gameplay at the end too. I think that's engaging with the candidates and that process too. Riyad, I'd love to move over to you and find out what your folks are doing around the candidate experience and how this translates into scale. And
yeah, absolutely. Like Jennifer pointed out, socials in today's world is such a huge factor for everyone, right? A fresh candidate on the market, someone you're trying to recruit, bring on board. And so it's what can your team do? What can you do with your marketing teams, branding teams to help get your company's name out there, show the value, show, it's all about ad culture, not culture ad. So I want to bring people that can add to our team's culture, as opposed to saying, hey, this is our culture and we'd love to add you to it. I want them to come in and add to our culture, grow our team out in that sense. And so, things like for example, we have a YouTube series, Coffee with HireTool, where people can share their experiences, and it gives candidates the ability to come in and see, oh, this is what HireTool's like. This is what HireTool does. And it gives them a chance to see different personalities on our team through things like an employee spotlight. And so it's how do we get creative in socials to bring traction to our company? And then taking it a step further, right, in an interview process, I like this idea of games, Jennifer. I might have to borrow that from you. But for me, if I'm bringing on someone like a customer success manager in my interview process, I want to give them time to explore the platform, because as we've pointed out, not only are we interviewing them, but they are also interviewing us. So this gives us a chance to make sure that, okay, is this candidate going to be a fit for our team? But they get to also decide, is this offering, is this company going to be a fit for me as well? And so it's finding the right balance. Socials, what are you doing on interviews? What's your personality carrying through on these interview calls? And being remote, I have the same face on every camera screen, so it doesn't change. And it's about, during those first couple minutes in an interview is, how do you loosen up those tense vibes, just calm things down, break the ice, and then, yes, you do have questions, but give them a chance to ask questions as well.
I love that. I love kind of getting that comfort level between the organization, yourself, the candidate. I love the idea of social too. I haven't heard, I know it's out there, but I don't think I've heard the concept around kind of the YouTube and like go and check out our culture and here's some of the short videos and you can kind of get familiar with us from the get-go. I love that opportunity.
It goes beyond company parties, right? Culture is 5 years ago, you would just have the last barbecue, all employee barbecue and so on. This is not the same. Now you need to talk about diversity and inclusion, equality, respect, safety, trust. There are all kinds of values that you need to introduce yourself. And I mean, if you were talking to someone about diversity and inclusion 10 years ago, they would have no idea what you're talking about. And you can't do without anymore because you're not going to attract those candidates and it's just going to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah. Candidates want to see if you're talking the talk, you're walking the walk too. And so I think that comes across, in that branding, in that social environment. And in particular, as you're trying to grow a team at an accelerated rate too, you need some of those levers to pull, so to speak, from a social aspect and from other channels that you can bring in. Jocelyn, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to mention that socials, it's something that it's very hard to do for short term. So if you are going to do it, you think about long term, because a lot of content, and if you actually see digital marketing, how it's evolved, a lot of what content marketing is actually providing valuable content to the people that are in touch with you on a day-to-day basis. So for example, for Hays and, all the recruitment firms, we're always giving, insights about, what the market is like. We do surveys, we do a lot of these, data gathering and actually still providing it back to the customers, and also having microsites for workers as well, for them to actually look at what's interesting, how what's still out there, what are the other things, what are the interview tips I can pick up, techniques and stuff like that as well. So I think for a lot of companies, content marketing is sort of what they've been thinking but never has sort of gone ahead and do it, but because it's such a long-term strategy that in order to actually build that content marketing, content culture, they need to start doing that from sort of now, and actually think about this is going to work and generate return on investment maybe a year or even 2 years down the line, depending on what they put in. And that's going to evolve, right? You never know. There are many companies that do little microsites, little podcasts, things like that as well, that we don't really see, and it's going to evolve organically as well, and it's definitely something fun for them to kind of think about doing.
Right. I talk about iterate and optimize, and I think that's a lot of what we have to do. You have to iterate, and sometimes even on the fly too, as you're moving candidates through the process and accelerating that process too. I'd love to give Estrela an opportunity to maybe chime in here and talk through.
I just think one thing is playing into the pandemic is how an org handled themselves, especially during those first few key months, plays a lot into their branding now. Were they empathetic if they had to do a massive layoff? How did they accommodate their people? Did they go remote first? And did they stick to being remote first? I think those things organically happen, and that today, a year and a half later, plays into how interested people are in that org. If someone they did a mass layoff and it was very confusing and there wasn't any resources, I don't think people would want to go back, or maybe they had a cousin that worked there, and that it's a lot of word of mouth. But I think it took center stage on how people handled that, especially with the pandemic hitting.
Absolutely. This is a great time, I think, to pause and look at some of the. I think there's some good questions that kind of fit into this topic that I'd like to surface from the audience. This one's been out there for a little while, so I'll start with it. I think. So I'm trying to think of how to frame this. So what do you think about the wage war that is happening right now with a lot of organizations? And do you see this lasting? So there's a lot of competition out there. Folks have options. Anyone kind of want to raise a hand and offer up some advice? Or what do you kind of see out there in the market with some of the candidates in terms of the wage war?
I'm not sure this is new, this wage war. I think it has always existed to a certain extent. Maybe it's a bit more common in various roles, but I think when you look at tech roles, the wage war, if you want to name it that, has always been there. I think if anything, wage is one, but especially for tech roles, self-development is going to be a huge factor. Tech people definitely want to continue to develop. Technologies are developing really, really fast. And if you can provide a path to growth that is going to scale for the employee as much as for your company, then wage is important, but being able to continue to learn the next coding language and the one next to that without having to quit your job and going back to school is going to be invaluable as well. So I think sometimes it's about not so much the wage as such. There are so many other things that can be part of a decision-making process for a candidate. We are not necessarily the most highly paying company in the customer success space in Amsterdam. We do have an amount of training budget every year. We do free up people to take courses and classes to develop themselves in and outside their work. And that doesn't necessarily factor in the wage, but it's such a concrete gift for that own person's growth that it can trump the pure wage side of things. Of course, you will always have people who will be very salary driven and so on. And this is also up to you as a company on what do you want to hire and who do you want to hire. If you hire only very salary driven people, you will have to replace them quite regularly because anyone who comes with a higher salary is going to steal them away from you. So it's also a matter of choice at some point. Do you engage in the wage war? Is that candidate worth it? Or do you think this is just someone that is going to go for the biggest paycheck and might not contribute, like Riyad said, to our own culture?
Yeah, no, very, very well said. Anyone else want to chime in on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. We look at a lot of sort of contractor, contingent labor, I suppose, and I think that's where we see the most of this wage war, I suppose, because I think we're in such a skilled shortage market at the moment that some companies are willing to throw money at the problem is how I call it. But I think, as organizations are actually reviewing the budgets and actually going back to, working in the office and that kind of stuff, then I think in terms of work-life balance, like Jennifer said, there are other things that play into it. There might be candidates who say they're willing to take a lower rate, but work completely remotely, or actually, if there are a chance to upskill. And I think especially for tech projects and stuff like that, if you can actually really articulate the kind of projects that you're working on, a lot of tech people are actually genuinely just very passionate artists in their own right, and they actually just want to work on a project that interests them and they want to solve problems, they want to do this, and your company actually has a project that allows them to do it. And I think some people are negotiable in that sense, and to be fair, like if you really have to look at your budget and actually say, like, how close to the market rate, what is the market rate and how close can I get to it? Like if you're paying, like £100 less than what the market rate is, then, you're not really participating in it. You're just underpaying, market rate. But actually, if it's quite close, what else is there that, like Jennifer said, that you can actually offer? Is it, like interesting topic like that you get to be part of? Is it like new tech? Do you get to develop something new? Do you get to take part in, other things? Where else can you develop? Like, can you pick up other stuff as well that also make up for, something that money cannot buy?
Yeah, great.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was to say, I was just going to offer up. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I was going to, something that Jocelyn pointed out, right, is understanding kind of where the market's at and the market rate is. And one thing that we try to empower the recruiting teams that use HireTool to do is understand the data around the market. And that just that point on the market rate is so important. I've worked with so many recruiting teams that will take a look at, our insights and say, oh, I think we're off the mark. We might need to readjust. And then they can have these conversations internally with hiring managers, right, with hiring teams to really set the right expectation for the recruiters that are going out to find the talent. So, understand that talent, understand the market, where the market's at, and then, set the right expectation for your recruiting teams to go out and find the appropriate talent. So wage war will be around for a while. I agree with Jennifer on this one, but it's also
Always.
about the total package and the right expectations.
Yeah, one thing to add on to that is you mentioned market rate, and that's something we do a lot of data research there. One thing I'm starting to notice, because of people are relocating, because they're remote now, there's starting to be a leveling off of rate. I think managers, especially in the US, used to say, okay, just hire in a lower cost part of the country. But that doesn't really mean anything anymore. We're seeing software engineers that were, I guess, 170K base in the Bay Area. They're like, okay, well, let's hire somewhere else. They're still asking for that amount, even though they relocated. So I think keeping that in mind is going to be very important, is that it may not come down to where they live anymore. It's just going to come down to specifically skill set.
Great feedback from each of you. I'm going to go ahead and move into kind of another subtopic here. So another question from the audience. How do you manage to keep a uniform level of quality in between interviews when selling and employer branding capacity might not be evenly spread in the interviewing team? It's an interesting question. Anyone?
It's a little loaded question.
I was going to say, how do I interpret this?
Three-part question. Go for it, Jocelyn.
I'll start. So how I'll interpret this is, I suppose, like, are you asking? Okay, I'm going to position this to around questions. I think asking the right questions is a skill and an art in its own right? If you know how to ask the right questions, you will get the answer that you want. I think the one thing that, like that companies and the hiring managers need to really remember is that, are you really asking the right open-ended questions that allow the candidates to perform the best that they can in an interview and not kind of box them in to a certain direction? And I think keeping that in mind is definitely one of the things that you need to ensure, like the level of quality in between the interviews. Like I say, like we've had a lot of competency-based interviews where you say you ask around a competency, but think about actually, like, in addition to competency, what do you really want to know about a candidate? If it's a tech role specifically about skill sets and stuff like that, ask them how they have done a project, like their involvement from like beginning to finish, how they've done it, what problems they've solved. Then in essence, you can actually look at, okay, well, these are the competencies I'm looking for. Did they complete it using the hard skills that I need them to? What problems came up and how did they mitigate it? So how they solve the problem. So that also explains all the communications and their logical thinking as well. And I think, some of these like questions can actually encompass a few of these areas. So I think for me that, the number one thing is actually making sure you're asking the right questions in between these different interviews, and make sure that they're relatively consistent with each other. You don't have to ask them the same way, but they should cover sort of the same kind of theme and, like core thinking or core competencies that you want to assess them for.
I think I understand the question now. So I think what they're saying is if all of the interviewers, maybe they don't all have the selling within them, a simple answer is to have your best seller or the main hiring manager go last. That way, if there's any concerns that the candidate has throughout that interview panel, that person can help mitigate or help answer any concerns that they might have, and they can kind of like end it on a good note. So that's a simple strategy, is to have your best seller be the last person to go.
And does everybody need to sell and be able to do employer branding in the entire process? We're talking about an interview team. Not everybody needs to sell. Not everybody needs to be on the money and at a high level of employer branding and being able to translate that. I think authenticity is very important. So if you go in and you're going to sell the job, then you're probably doing something wrong somewhere already, right? If you have to sell it, is it not interesting? Is it not valuable? Do you not have an impact in this job? So if you have to sell in every interview round, then probably there is something that needs to be revised. I think authenticity is the best employer branding that you can have if everybody is just representative and are not trying to sell it to you. At the end of the day, the person starts, and if you sell it too hard, they're going to realize that you sold them wind, and then you're going to have to start from scratch again and hire again. So I would not necessarily think that everybody needs to do this. And especially when it comes to peers, they don't want to sell anything. They just want to get to know the person and see if they get excited to work together. So not everybody needs to do that. I would say it's probably more on the recruiter side and maybe on the hiring manager side, but then when it comes to skill set and team fit, you might not need an absolute top seller.
I totally understand that question wrong. Sorry.
We all had to look at it a bit differently anyway.
No, yeah, I'm with you on that one. Like, I think, like you said, authenticity is so important. I think more often than not, like if you actually do face challenges within the team, even within the kind of work that you do, it's actually a better idea just to be upfront about it and say, like, this is the problem that we have. This is why we need to bring someone in. And if you think about it, every vacancy that you work for and every open recruitment that you have is effectively a problem that you're finding a solution to. It just so happens the solution is a person.
To add to that, to a certain extent, the candidate may have already also sold themselves on your team or your company, right? To a certain extent, they're going to read up about your company before they come into an interview. So, inquiring a little bit about what they understand about, for example, HireTool as they come into the interview on its own could give you a pretty good indication of, is this candidate sold and really wants to be a part of our team, or, are they here because they just need a job? So to a certain extent, coming back to open-ended questions, that in its own right could be enough selling right there.
All great feedback. So I knew this was going to go fast. We were talking about this before we hopped on. So we're about 14 or so minutes left here. And so we've kind of naturally moved into kind of the Q&A portion from the audience. And I see a host of questions. If there's any other questions, I would recommend to send them now, because this is the appropriate time for us to answer those questions. So I'll kind of keep going with some questions from the audience. Are you aware of any resources or trainings we can provide our hiring managers to perform better quality interviews and to interview for skill discovery and culture fit? Or anything coming to mind for folks?
Our TA team invited the entire company to the License to Hire training, which was organized by our recruitment team. Yes, it's James Bond themed, but it's more about, making sure you ask the right questions, making sure you don't ask certain questions, or how to respond to certain questions that are maybe more loaded than others, but as well in how the mindset that you go into an interview. In the end, it doesn't make sense to give anyone a list of 20 questions. It's more interesting to say, what do I want to learn from this interview, and have a conversation. And then if towards the end you say, okay, this one I don't have the answer on, then you can start asking questions. It's much better to have a conversation and then make sure you get out of this conversation what you want. And in the end, the candidate will have a few questions, but they also want to get something out of the conversation. And it's much better, I would say, at least in my experience with companies and as a hiring manager, to focus on the outcome than on the actual question or the wording or anything like this. And it makes for more relaxed conversations as well.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of resources. This is a resource. This webinar is a resource. I think the most important thing is making sure that they're receptive to that. Maybe they have to have experienced a little more pain before they are open to that. So I think that's something to consider before you try to figure out what's the right resource for them. But like Jennifer said, I think having a conversation is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, I agree. With I think it really depends on how experienced the hiring manager is, and I think a lot of that you can probably, like, there's loads of resources, and the reason why I probably wouldn't suggest a single one is because, like, it's always going to be what's best fit for your organization and what's best fit for the kind of people who's doing the hiring and the kind of people that you're trying to hire. I think one of the most important questions that a talent partner and the hiring manager need to decide at the forefront absolutely is what do I want to see from this candidate? And actually, if it's a little bit of an inexperienced hiring manager, this is where the talent partner can actually come in and actually ask them, ask the hiring manager the questions. Is like, okay, well, actually, tell me about this job, tell me about the kind of stuff that you want this person to achieve. And then we'll figure out actually, what kind of skill set you actually need to look out for. And having a general theme, I think, makes it a little bit easier for the hiring managers to still have a very organic and authentic conversations whilst not, like, too stuck to the script. And I think that's the number one thing, like, sticking to the script is always a little bit of a tougher experience for the candidate, because I feel like you're just trying to get through all these different questions and look at the check boxes as opposed to actually having a genuine interest in the candidate during the interview.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Rhea.
I was going to say one thing that is always important as well is we have a lot of companies, a lot of teams have TA teams that are there to support the folks on the interview calls, the hiring managers, the decision makers. Candidates could forget, or interviewers could also forget, that hiring managers have their day-to-day role that's outside of just interviewing and speaking to candidates. So, even if they have quite a bit of experience, this could be an out of comfort zone for them. And that's really where the TA teams that, on a day-to-day basis work with candidates, talk to candidates, or, are focused around candidate experience can share these best practices with the hiring managers. And that's out of my own experience.
That's great. So just a couple more questions here before I think we move into kind of closing comments. So there's a question here. How do you manage the high rotation on candidates that have been hired and then quit really quick? Not sure if anyone here has that experience, but
yeah, it happens on the contracting side quite a bit.
Yeah.
Overall, I think the first question you need to understand is why. And the first question that as a recruitment partner or as a talent partner, I would be interested in why they're leaving. And if you have a volume of them leaving altogether, like you hire 10 and then like 8 of them just like, I don't want to do this anymore, then you gotta want to understand, well, why don't you want to do this anymore? Sometimes it might not, be a form of exit survey. It could be like actually just, either your HR, your recruitment partner or talent partner, actually just go back to these candidates and say, look, we just want to have a conversation with you to understand what is your experience, and making sure that these candidates feel like they have a safe space to talk about their experience. And it's up to the talent partner then to manage the message back to the hiring manager, and actually in a very constructive way, and actually see that actually, is it working practices that we need to change, or is it that what you're expecting, is different from what you were originally recruiting for? Because the hiring manager might also have feedback on these candidates who's left as well. Maybe they mutually agree that it's not the right fit. So I think first and foremost is actually understanding why, and understanding, especially if they're leaving at a quick, turnaround, understanding quick what the problem is, and then see like, okay, well, we know what it is now. What can we do? Like, what are realistically the things that we can change when we go back out to the market again?
That's great.
I would say to add to that, feedback, if possible, is so crucial, right? If you can collect that from that candidate that's recently moved on now, it is so helpful to help you improve the process for the next candidate that comes in and the next candidate after that. But something that I want to emphasize, right, that's so important is pipeline, where those silver medalists, the people that were also up for this role at a previous time, might be time to re-engage with them. Revisit your talent pipelines, people that you've been proactively reaching out to, or people that you might have been nurturing along. So it's important to always have something to fall back on in case you're in said scenario.
Yeah, I think we'd be naive to think, especially our contractors aren't being hit up all the time on LinkedIn, even though they just started a job. One thing that we try to do is to form a real human connection with them, even though we can't see them in person. Sometimes we can. It's harder for them to look us in the eye or through the screen and quit on us if they know us as a person and we know them as a person. And it's also easy for us to tell if it's coming, like if we know they're about to quit, because they've kind of given us some clues and we can try to mitigate that as much as possible. So just being a human about it can help. But in the end, they're also humans and they're going to do what they're going to do. We can't control a lot of it.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with contractors. So if I see a high turnover in one of the teams or in a company, I would do like Justin said. First of all, do you sell the job that you're hiring for, or do they suddenly find themselves with a whole other set of responsibilities than what you've discussed in the interview? I think at some point you also have to think about the profile that you're hiring and your wages, and make sure that you tick all the boxes and that you actually deliver on expectations. I'm not sure what really quick is. It could be weeks, it could be 2 months, it could be a year. Everybody has their own definition of what quick would be. I think at some point when you hire and you grow fast, you will probably hire multiples anyway. So have a look at your successes and those who leave and see what are the characteristics that make people stay and who are the profiles that are leaving, and learn from that. We all make mistakes. That's not the important thing. The important thing is to learn from them. And again, iterate and optimize. And this in the hiring process it's so true, not only because the job market changes, the industry change, the whole new generation of workers is coming on the market. Every time there is a different mindset to it, but there is also everything that you can do and you can deliver. And it's always evolving. 18 months ago, we had to close all the offices. Well, we all had to figure it out somehow. So this is always going to change. And you can never say, this is my hiring process for now, for the next 20 years. It's never going to be like this. So we have to let go and really embrace the fact that it's always going to be evolving.
Absolutely. I think this gives us a natural kind of ending or closing point. We have just a few minutes left. I'd love to give our panelists one kind of opportunity here to leave our audience with any other advice or words of wisdom around this topic before we kind of officially close things out. Is there anyone that would like to start?
I'll go first. I think if there is one thing I like sort of to, like for everyone to take away is a lot happens before you start the recruitment process. Like when you're hiring for growth, when you're hiring for scale, the most effort is actually done before you actually even go out to market. And that means that are you having valuable conversations with your talent partner, between hiring managers and talent partner? Are you creating a job description that is realistic, right? You can have a job description that's got 50 things that's listed on it with 20 odd requirements. But as a talent partner these days, you need to really look at that and actually tell your hiring managers, do you really need all these things on this list? Or tell me the big picture. Tell me about the kind of things that you guys are doing right now, where the business is moving forward, and actually where do you really need the skill set? Do you actually need someone that does the bread and butter side, or do you actually need someone that actually creates solutions for you? And actually identifying actually getting hiring managers to think about their role, the thing that they're trying to solve, like getting them to think about it from a macro to a micro level, and actually really nailing that requirement to say that, okay, we'll go in this direction, but this is what we'll do, and then we'll resync again. It's actually being agile about it as well through the process. But I think a lot of work is actually done beforehand, agreeing on the standard process, agreeing on the requirements. We'll set the stone, and actually especially when you're hiring volume, it's actually say okay, this is what we're going to go with, and this is what's going to happen, and we'll regroup at this point, and then we'll decide whether or not we need to do anything to change. So I think you kind of have to run it so as you would run a project. It's becoming more and more like that these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Happy to share some closing words here on my end as well. But one thing that we always encourage, right, the end users, the recruiters on HireTool to do is, have you had that conversation to align the right expectations with your hiring manager before you even begin? Like Jocelyn points out, it's so important to get that out of the way before you even start looking for the candidate that's the right fit. And then from there, how do you go about building out your talent pipeline, finding the candidates that have those core competencies that are required for the role, not, all the skill sets that are possibly on a job description. Ultimately, we hire people, we don't hire resumes, right? And then from there, it's how do you nurture the candidate along to bring them on board, bring them into the interview process, and then from there, very well-structured onboarding process as well. So, just take that time, align yourself before you even start, and just take it one step at a time from there.
That's great. Great advice. Jennifer, Estrela, no pressure if you'd like to share. Yeah.
I think what struck with me the most in this conversation, and also the question from the audience, is that a lot revolves around the hiring manager, right? Mm-hmm. The talent partners kind of know what they want to do. The candidates know what they're looking for, and the hiring manager is very often the variable here. Are they trained enough? Do they know enough? Are they available? So if anything, I would say is make it easy for the hiring manager. They have their own job, right? They're tech leads, they're in accounting, they're in customer success, they're in the sales department. And this is really the talent partner and the recruiter's job, right? They do this all day long. But for the hiring manager, this is a 1 hour interview or a half-hour session where we're going to review CVs. It's a side activity. And the easier you can make it on the hiring manager, the the faster you're going to hire in the end. You're going to know what they're looking for, show them the candidates that they want to see, which means they're going to block the time in the calendar for you to interview, because they know that everyone you're going to present is going to be a worthy candidate. Because like Jocelyn said, the pre-work has been done. And when you hire multiples and the pre-work has been done, then you might see 5 candidates and hire 3 of them, because a lot of the pre-work has been done and you're really spending quality time. And then the pain of the hiring manager, or the bottleneck of the hiring manager, gets easier. So I would say the focus is not necessarily only on the employer branding. It's a lot about making it easier for the hiring manager to support you, and then you can be successful in hiring fast and at scale.
Excellent points. Estrela, I want to give you an opportunity if you had some words of wisdom.
Yeah, I think what's really important, especially right now, is to keep your finger on the pulse of the market and then look at the data and pivot accordingly. So if you see someone's on the market for an average of 10 days, shorten your process. If you're seeing that there are more Salesforce jobs than there are people, then maybe upskill some of your internal employees and train them in Salesforce. So I think just like looking at the data and constantly making assessments based off of that is going to be really important, especially right now.
Fantastic. And that puts us pretty much right at time. So again, I want to say thank you to our panelists. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed moderating this webinar with each and every one of you. I want to thank again our partners at Recruity and HireTool for being able to help us with this event and help us with any other questions that happen after this. Just really a fantastic discussion. I wish each of you a great rest of your day or evening in some cases, and I hope to talk with you all again soon. Thank you so much.